Hello and welcome to Chapter 7. This chapter is about nourishment and nutrition. So if we were to summarize one of the major tenets when it really comes to healing binge eating and returning to understanding and honoring your body's communications and your body's needs, if you were to have one guideline to repeat to yourself during times of confusion or uncertainty, it's I feed my body when I'm hungry. Now, what's really important about this is, as you'll notice, this statement is not I don't binge or I don't eat sugar. It's not I don't eat when I'm full, all those don'ts. It's more about what you will do. I will feed my body when I'm hungry. And this is a way of really honoring your body, because the body's needs aren't, although we do kind of work in rhythms, it's not a pure exact science, as in that you're always going to be hungry at 12. Some days you might be hungry at 11:30. And the more willing you are to start to experiment with understanding true hunger and then feeding your body when you're hungry, that is what's going to build trust and enhance your listening skills. And that is what is going to help you walk away from this experience of binge eating, compulsive eating, eating that feels out of balance. So you've heard me say before that a lot of healing binge eating has to do with more of how we eat, how we relate to our bodies, how we relate to food. But today's chapter is about the what. We're going to start to move into this area that can be pretty confusing and actually has a lot of conflicting information about how foods actually affect us and why it matters also what you're eating. It's just, again, if you are trying to recover from the impulsiveness or the emotionality of eating, focusing on the what as your priority is going to slow down your process, and it's going to really kind of interfere with your ability to heal. So we're including the what because it's important and it does matter, but again, it can't be the priority. So when we really talk about nourishment, nutrition, metabolism, we're going to start to include some of the science about how our bodies work, what we know about how our bodies thrive, and we have to take into account, even though we do have a lot of information about, in general, what serves people and what builds health, it's still so highly individual that honestly it's changing all the time. I mean, I've certainly been a nutritionist long enough that I was working during the years when everything was still about being very low fat, low calorie, low salt, no eggs, no cheese, no butter. All of that science has now been invalidated. So we want to take the what of what we're eating and we're going to take it with a grain of salt. So the idea here is that all foods really do fit. If there's foods that you love, that you can find ways to include them in what you eat. It's just you want to be able to include them in a way that helps you still feel good and helps you still feel like you're on the right path that's best for your body. So I love the idea of the 80-20 rule. If 80% of the time that you're eating foods that you know are nourishing and are good building blocks, then 20% of the time you've got the wiggle room to find foods that are enjoyable, to enjoy foods. I mean, ideally all foods are enjoyable when you're sitting down and nourishing your body, but let's say that 20% of the time is more of the fun foods. So that aside, 80-20 as the beginning part of how you want to start to think about these things. When we start to talk about that 80%, what we're really talking about is whole foods. And one of the fun things that we talk about in children's nutrition is the idea, we tell little kids to try to eat the rainbow. Can you eat something purple today? Something blue, green, yellow, orange, red? But that is great advice for adults as well. If we're going through the whole rainbow of plants, we know we're filling our bodies with antioxidants, disease-fighting molecules, and lots of vitamins and nutrients that really will help serve our health and serve our chemistry. So this is where we're going to start to go for the rest of this chapter, is about what does it really mean to have nourishing foods, and even talk about what are whole foods. So whole foods is a term that's been used lately. By lately, I mean like the last really 20 years or so. If we could rewind to the 1900s, there was no real concept of what was a real whole food or even what was organic. Like these are new terms now because actually starting in the 1940s and 50s, we started to create the food industry. And I'm trying to think of the right word that they called some of these ultra processed foods is actually edible products. So you can imagine there's actually a difference between an edible product, meaning something you can put in your mouth and it won't, well, you can at least digest it and eliminate it. I can't say whether or not it'll harm you, but you can put it in your mouth. It's an edible product. Now that's different than food, like food that comes from the earth. So when people start to wonder or try to understand what are real whole foods, here are some questions you can ask yourself. Can you imagine it growing? So for example, there's no such thing as a field of marshmallows. Did your great-grandmother eat it? Was this food around a long time ago? So for example, butter, yogurt, those are very old foods. Our bodies know exactly how to digest, absorb those foods, and how to use those foods. Another question to determine if this is a real whole food is, will it go bad? If it sits on the counter long enough, will it rot? So for example, I will say something like a Twinkie or French fries, those will often sit on the counter for quite a long time. They might dry out, but they will continue to take their shape and it's actually pretty hard for them to mold. So real foods, a tomato, when you actually pick it from the vine, on a cellular level, it's still alive. And it will go bad. And so we want to eat foods that have lots of vitality because that is one of the ways that we know that this food is all-inclusive of the things that we need for it. And the reason why that's important is because one of the things we're starting to understand is that artificial foods, artificial flavors can trigger what's being called like artificial appetite. So let's actually see if I've got this next slide here. I know this is going to be a hard slide to read, but this is about, I would say maybe this could be about 35 to 40 different labels here. And if you were to guess what this is, it's pretty hard to guess. It looks like a whole chemistry experiment. But this is actually the formula for artificial strawberry flavor. So that's what had to be created in order to make what, to our taste buds, resembles strawberries. Now that's a lot of compounds there that have been put together that our body may or may not know how to actually handle. So what happens with artificial foods and artificial flavors is that it can put our body into heightened responses. And by heightened, let's take, for example, artificial sweetener. At first, people thought that artificial sweetener was kind of a wonder, a wonderful discovery because it didn't have any calories. So the reason it doesn't have any calories is because molecularly, it's in a formation that our body can't actually digest and absorb. So you can imagine in order for a calorie to really count as energy, it's something that we can like digest and absorb and use. And if it's excessive calories, we might use it, yes, but we might also store it as adipose tissue. But when we can't actually digest and absorb a molecule, that means our body will then just continue to eliminate it. So we actually just poop it out. So that's why artificial sugar doesn't have calories, is because it can't go all the way into our systems. We essentially just eliminate it. I will say that process of elimination for artificial substitutes, sugar substitutes, can be pretty problematic for some people. People can have a lot of side effects. And I'm not even talking about like the cancer causing concerns that people have. I just mean like sometimes just awful gas to the point where, you know, it's sent some people to the hospital considering whether or not they had like gallbladder issues. And it's really just trouble with digesting artificial sweeteners. So what we have now discovered happens with artificial sugar is that digestion begins in the mouth. And when we taste sweetness in the mouth, that sends a message to the brain to prepare to digest glucose. And what that means to our digestive system is to prepare an insulin response, because that's how we work with glucose when we consume it. What happens though is that artificial sweetness then travels down to the belly, but the glucose doesn't actually show up because it's not present, but it doesn't matter anymore. The body's now mounted its insulin response. And so that affects blood sugar levels in our body, whether or not we actually consume the glucose. And for a lot of people, that can actually initiate some sweet cravings. So that's a real specific example of how artificial foods can trigger a whole, again, they're kind of like artificial appetite or artificial responses that happen in our bodies. And so the more we can eat whole, natural, real foods, then our body knows exactly what to use and how to use those foods. And we'll come back to this a bit more when we're talking about how that actually really makes a difference when it comes to getting your fullness cues. So let's actually go back just one more. When we're talking about like food additives, how they contribute to cravings, health concerns. In natural foods, those flavors are indicators to the body about the nutrition of the food. Similar to how I said like sweetness indicates there's probably going to be glucose. If you were eating an orange, the flavors of orange are indicating to the body that vitamin C is soon coming into the digestive system and it's time to process and prepare for vitamin C. So the essence is that processed foods interfere with our body's messages of hunger, our body's messages of what nutrients we're consuming, and our body's messages of fullness. And here's a bit more on that fullness is that there's something about whole foods that seem to come with like this natural shutoff. For example, it's pretty rare in my experience that people come to me and that they're actually binging on apples, carrots. Typically, when you eat an apple or carrots, if you're truly hungry, you might eat more than one apple, but really you eat one apple and you're like, I feel complete, I'm done. There's just something about when these foods are whole and natural that the inherent messaging in our bodies helps us say, I've had enough. But take it on a different food, I can think for myself how easy it is to eat a whole box of cookies, or let's just say a whole box of macaroni and cheese, a whole box of cereal. There's something about, you notice I said box actually with all those three examples. There's something about the way that we can just consume those foods, and for some reason our bodies, they don't register fullness like they would in the apple example. So this is just part of starting to understand, yes, all foods fit. The 80-20 rule definitely applies. And choosing to eat whole, real foods is actually going to start to simplify things and make things easier on you. Because when your body tells you it's full, when your body says it's had enough, that can go a long way towards starting to create this divide and cross this threshold of you being able to listen to your body and trust your body. So many people, when they've been in cycles of binge eating, say, I can't trust myself. Well, I would like to suggest maybe it's actually that we can't trust these foods, especially these ultra processed foods or edible products. So let's keep going and talk a bit about also meals and snacks, because that is a question that I get all of the time. Should I have 6 small meals? Should I fast all the day and just eat dinner? Are snacks allowed? And the truth is there's no right answer to that. With all of the studies that we've got on metabolism, what we're really discovering is that what matters is that you find an eating style that kind of works with your lifestyle and your personality. So if it feels good to you to have 6 small meals kind of scheduled throughout the day, and that's easy and reasonable for your lifestyle, then that's what works for you. If you're more of a 3 square meals a day person because you want to eat a meal, feel your fullness, and then not have to think about food for several hours, that's going to make sense for you too. So there's a lot of ways to do this right. What matters is that you're listening to you. People also wonder about like food allergies and sensitivities. So you can get blood tests for those things. The tests certainly come with false positives or false negatives. And sometimes, often enough, honestly, people get those tests come back and it just looks like they're sensitive to everything. And that indicates more of like a leaky gut issue. So Food allergies, food sensitivities are a very real thing. They definitely impact health. They can certainly impact arthritis and autoimmune issues. So it's something that needs to be honored and addressed. And yet it's also a bit of a fad. So it's really popular sometimes for people to start different fad things. So keto, for example, is a medical diet. It's actually especially very, very useful for people with like epilepsy or certain neurological disorders. And keto can really help some people who have trouble with glucose management and insulin and things like that. So keto has its place, but yet there was a long time period in recent history where everybody was trying keto, at least for a little while. So we go through these fads, whether or not it's, somebody might be just trying out gluten-free, which there's nothing wrong with experimenting and seeing what's right for your body. So again, it's kind of about the intention or the tone of why you're choosing these things. So experimenting's good, but if experimenting is coming from a place of not just scrutiny, but I need to find the right thing or there's a perfect thing out there, that's not true. There's no one perfect thing out there. And, the people who write like these big popular books about like, let's say fasting or keto or some other kind of fancy, often restrictive diet, they found something that worked for them, which is amazing and wonderful. And it will probably work for some people, but it's never a miracle. It never works for everybody. So it's just really essential to get to a place of simplicity, especially if you're coming from impulsive, compulsive, binge eating place, is you want to just simplify. You want to feed your body when it's hungry, and you want to try to keep as much variety as you can. And I'm saying that as a reference to some of these food sensitivities and allergies. Okay, so I actually talked about sugar just a little bit earlier, about how sugar often is addictive. In fact, people don't really want to hear about animal studies, but when they've done animal studies on like mice and rats where they offer them water that is laced with cocaine versus water that has sugar in it versus water with artificial sweetener, the animals actually choose the artificial sweetener water, and they go back to it again and again. And so it's just another thing. Sometimes this comes up a lot, honestly, for people who feel really addicted to diet soda. That is an addictive product. So we want to start to separate out, like when you're in a place of self-blame, what's wrong with me that I can't quit, versus really starting to understand this product itself is addictive. So people sometimes want to move away from this idea of the word food addiction or sugar addiction. And the truth is, a lot of people actually find, kind of looking at it through that window, that it can be useful. In general, addiction comes to mind with like this idea of abstinence. That typically doesn't really work in the realm of food. It works great for things like alcohol and drugs, where you truly can say a complete no. But food, we can't say no to. We have to learn the middle line with food. And honestly, although some people do go cold turkey and quit sugar, that is a pretty high ask of yourself, just given our current culture and how much sugar is in some of our foods. So really, moderation is key. And that's going to be a lot of what it means to find balance. Okay, let's keep going. So one of the things that we've talked about is I feed my body when I'm hungry. Well, some people have gone years without actually feeling their hunger. Some people are very scared to feel their hunger. And in fact, if you've been on a history of a lot of dieting, you've learned how kind of painful it can feel to like activate that food scarcity and feel that you can't eat, you don't have enough like calories or points, and that your body's really hungry. So like our relationship with hunger is often pretty distorted. So healing our relationship with hunger is a major piece in this journey, and hunger is our ally. And what I mean there is hunger is a friend. It is a set of sensations and clues that is your body on a like biochemical level is saying, I am in need of food. I am ready to digest food. Hunger is essentially like the green light. It's you saying, yes, this is time to eat. Your body is talking to you. So what hunger feels like to people is different. Some people actually do feel like growling in their belly. Other people will just get more like lightheaded or feel like they're having difficulty concentrating. Some people feel irritable. Some people even feel a little faint or headaches. So the sensations for hunger can be in a lot of places besides just like growling belly. And that's important for you to start to understand what your physical hunger is so that you can start to then separate out what is emotional hunger. I actually had a family member that would always say, well, like, I'm in the mood to eat, or I could eat. So that might be true, but that's not actually saying I'm hungry. And what we want to do, we want to distill down to, is my body hungry? Is it actually telling me it's ready for food? Because that is the body's cues. And it's not dissimilar to like the body telling you need to pee. You get a clue when you need to do that. Same thing is true for hunger and fullness. It's just because of the dieting industry and often years of yo-yo dieting and exposure to all these food morals, we've often like really quieted down our body's cues. So if you're not clear if you're physically hungry, one thing to know is that physical hunger will grow. So if you're not sure if it's physical hunger, the idea is to wait and to be patient and to keep checking in. So if you're unclear, wait. And if you suspect that it might be a more emotional hunger or a habitual hunger, ask yourself, what am I hungry for? You might be hungry for a break. You might be hungry for a nap. You might be hungry for silence or some peace. So we can be hungry for a lot of things besides food. And so that is a really powerful secondary question to ask. Am I hungry? What am I hungry for? So one of the things that you want to do as you're healing this relationship with hunger, especially if you're healing from a place of food scarcity and feeling like there won't be enough, is to make sure that food's available. Because the idea here is that when you notice hunger, you want to be able to respond to it. If you feel like, oh, I'm hungry now, but I won't be able to eat for 2 hours, that's honestly too long, especially in the beginning of this process. You need to know that you might have some, let's say, nuts or granola bars that's in your glove box. So you have something accessible if you're going somewhere or in your desk, things like that. It doesn't have to be anything too well planned. It can just be something shelf stable that you have that you know if you're truly hungry, you can meet your body's needs. And you also don't want to get too hungry. So if you get to the point where you're in that hangry kind of experience, then the way the hunger gets so big, it's often hard to help it quiet down. So we want to be in that habit of rating the hunger that you remember on that hunger fullness ruler from 1 to 10. And the truth is here is that, on the hunger fullness ruler, 5 is neutral, 4 is getting hungry, and 3 is clearly hungry. 2 is too hungry. That's hangry. What often happens is that people start to just get a hint of hunger, like let's say a 4.5, and it's unsettling. It can feel unsafe. It can feel uncertain, and so they rush to make sure that they eat. And some people actually eat so much because they're trying to prevent ever feeling hungry. And that's part of what you want to start to shift and change too. We want to make peace with hunger and know that hunger is a body's natural sign. And it's actually your sign that your body is ready to welcome food and that your body needs food. So we want to be able to move into hunger and then move out. So you don't want to stay in it too long, but you also don't want to avoid it. So people ask me all the time about like, how much should I eat? What is a good amount of food? And obviously there is so much information out there trying to tell people what's right or what's perfect or how many calories or portion sizes or what are your macros and your, all of these number calculations that end up making you feel, I think, like an accountant, always just like crunching numbers. But the truth is our body is designed to give us clues about how much to eat, when to eat, and so on. So ideally, a meal should keep you full for about 3 to 5 hours. That's the sign that you've had enough of your protein, your fats, your carbs, your fiber, your water. Our body actually has what's called stretch receptors. So when the stomach has stretched enough, it sends a clue that we're full, and it has density receptors. And those are basically based on like fat and protein. So what you want to start to experiment with is to see if you eat a meal, if it's enough to keep you full for that 3 to 5 hour range. Now, some people burn through their breakfast pretty quick, so they're going to be hungry at 3 hours. But they also might find if they only had oatmeal, they're hungry at 2 hours. And if they had oatmeal and an egg, they're hungry at 4 hours. So this is a really interesting graph here. The blue line represents simple carbs. So that would be something like orange juice. Now, every time that line goes up, you reach a sense of fullness. But when the line goes back down, your insulin drops and you get hungry again. So you can see the blue line, what I'm saying here is like something like orange juice. It'll help you feel full for a little bit, but it's going to go away. Your body's going to burn through it real quick. That next line, that reddish line, is complex carbs. So a good example here would be like oatmeal or brown rice. Your body's going to register it, and it is going to keep you full a little bit longer. But again, it comes down within about an hour and a half, 90 minutes to 2 hours. Yellow represents protein. And then green represents fat. And you can really see the staying power of the fat in this graph here. That can actually keep a person full for about 4 hours. So this is an example of why you want a little bit of everything in your meal. You want the right amount of protein, fats, and carbs. And that's going to help you. Then the amount, the actual volume of it is then dependent on, did it keep you full for that 3 to 5 hour mark? So here again is just a quick look at that hunger fullness ruler where I referenced recently. 5 is neutral. You're not feeling hungry or full. Going towards fullness, you've got a 6 where you don't quite feel food in your belly, but you have a sense that you've eaten. At 7, you can actually feel a bit of solidness in your physical belly. You can feel a little bit of stretch and also contentment. And by 8, you're starting to get uncomfortable. And at 9, you're actually like in pain from too full. Moving the other direction, 4 is your body's clues that you're starting to get hungry. You're starting to get little hints that hunger is on its way, that it's increasing and it's starting to show up. And by 3, it's really clear. I am hungry. I've got the green light to eat. 2 now is starting to get moody, lightheaded, hangry. It's starting to go a little bit too far. Your body's getting too hungry. Here you might be likely to actually overeat if you let yourself get to a 2. So the other half of talking about how much should I eat is really learning also fullness. And this is often the hardest part for people, is stopping when you're full. So this is a place to be gentle. This is a place to experiment, to take your time. So it really is, we're creatures of habit. And oftentimes when our plate is empty, when the food is gone, that's usually our clue that we're done. And what we're talking about here is no longer making it be a visual cue. You want it to be about your body. And so that might mean in the beginning that you're eating and you're near finish and you notice there's a little kind of voice in your head that says, oh, I think I'm full. I think I'm good. But the truth is, so that's enough. Honor the fact that you heard that, whether or not you still finish those few bites. It can actually be really hard to just like walk away from those few bites. We start to rationalize that it's, you don't want to box it up, or you don't want to throw it away, or I should just finish it. In the end, that's a really powerful place to start to learn how to put your fork down and kind of essentially walk away. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in just a bit. So again, here, this bullet point just says success starts with recognizing the fullness, even if you don't stop eating. So just practice recognizing I'm full. I could stop. Fullness is subtle, and it does require us being slow and really present, because if you're walking around or watching TV, it's going to like kind of come and go, and it's going to be hard to recognize. So it's about being present if you want to really start to like tune in to listening. One of the things about fullness also is this idea, it's a good experiment actually, is to spend a week where you ask yourself to always leave one bite of food on the plate. Again, because we're such visual creatures, we think the meal's done when the food's gone for most people. So just having to leave one bite is a really interesting, triggering experiment, because so much of you is going to be feeling complete and nourished and grateful even for the food you've just had. And you can really watch your emotional self, what it's like to just like leave that one bite and how hard that is. But it's a good playing ground because it's kind of like a lukewarm, purposeful trigger. So one of the things that people often say is like, I should just have willpower. And I want to really suggest that either we need to do away with willpower or redefine it. I love this quote by Charles Eisenstein. The proper function of willpower and self-discipline is to extend wisdom and insight into times of imperfect clarity, to remember and apply the messages of one's inner voice. And he actually goes on to talk about this specifically in relationship to food. When used in this way, to remember oneself, to come back into alignment, willpower is natural and it's energizing. Whereas if we're just fighting ourselves, then willpower is an ordeal. The fact is that at any effort of self-improvement or change, including dietary change, relying mainly on willpower is destined to fail. If you resolve, I will make myself do it, then you are fighting yourself, and it means you are divided, that on some level you do not want to do it. When you are about to stuff yourself with cake, the appropriate use of willpower lies not in forcing yourself to refrain, but in remember exactly how being full or stuffing yourself feels and listening to how your body feels right now. Only then is your decision to eat or not eat an informed one, and an informed decision is more likely to be a wise decision. So again, willpower be about alignment to the whole of you, or sometimes even alignment to that the whisper voice of the future self. We often have like strong habits and emotional needs that I feel like have the microphone and want to shout at us. So the idea of a soulful willpower is about connecting deep within the core and aligning our choices there. And that's a beautiful redefinition of willpower. So when we're talking about food, we want to realize that nourishment is you really are what you eat. We have 330 billion cells that are replaced every day. So our cells are always turning over. We have new stomach lining every 3 to 5 days. New cells in the liver every 150 to 500 days. The skin actually turns over about every 3 weeks. We have new skin cells on the surface. And the bone cells are the slowest to turn over, but they turn over about every 7 to 10 years. And so that's why you often hear like we're not the same literally like physical being that we were 7 to 10 years ago, because the cells do constantly regenerate. I love the metaphor that our bodies are like a whirlpool in the river. You can go back to that river year after year after year and see that tiny little whirlpool. But the water is always different. The shape is the same. So our bodies are similar, but the water and the cells that are moving through us are always changing. And the truth is that food is actually our building blocks. What we eat literally becomes our physical being. It affects our chemistry. What we eat is part of how we create things like dopamine and oxytocin. And so when you think about food, you really want to start to think about, what are my building blocks? What are my construction materials? These are the things that the food that we eat becomes our body. It becomes and affects our outlook and our emotions. And so it's a really powerful choice that we often get overlooked, again, and especially today's food industry with edible food stuffs. And so this whole chapter wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about movement. So here's the primary thing to understand for exercise. Exercise should not be for weight loss. Exercise is so essential to us. We often don't want to think about it, but we are animals. Our bodies are meant to move. So we need exercise for flexibility. We need it for bone and muscle strength, heart and lung vitality. We need it for our sense of balance. And it also actually literally burns off stress. So we need movement. We need to actually put the good kind of stress on our bodies so that we stay strong. And that affects both muscles and bone, heart vessels, lymph, everything. Our modern world is just too sedentary. And there is a lot of research there actually comparing antidepressants versus exercise program and seeing almost like equivalent, if not better, improvements in people's depression scores when they start an exercise program. So there's something inherent about our bodies need to move that's often missing in our world. And so we need movement. You want to find movement that you enjoy. And this is about like finding the minimum effective dose, meaning you don't have to be in the gym an hour every single day. Even a 5-minute walk is going to create an energy boost. So movement is a fundamental need. It's something that is just inherent in how our bodies operate. And the idea that we can do without it is just like fighting against the universe. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to fit a certain amount of, counting your pulse or your heart rate. It doesn't have to be a certain amount of calories burned, but you want to get in the habit and the practice of finding what brings you joy and how to be in your body through movement. And most people will tell you there's no better confidence boost than actually feeling strong, being able to like lift up a suitcase or haul a thing of 40-pound bag of kitty litter. So to have strength as we move through this world changes our inherent experience of it. Feeling strong, even if like, let's say you move and you step off a curb funny, but you don't sprain your ankle, right? There's strength in your way of being as you just navigate the world. So movement and strength in our bodies is essential. And the more we can make space for that and just really understand that it's really kind of a non-negotiable as far as having it. What you get to decide though is what works for you. Okay, so this pretty much concludes our chapter on like nourishment and nutrition and movement. And I'll leave you with some experiments. One of the best things you can try is to spend 10 minutes outdoors every day. If you can, go barefoot on the grass. Okay, that is something that is going to reconnect you to your body, fresh air, sunlight, help you connect to the animal part of these animal selves. I'd also like to encourage you to try one new food that you've never had before. And now, honestly, if that just means you normally get green apples, try a red apple, right? It doesn't have to be too wild, but just go to the store, bring home something new. And then also play with choosing a rainbow of colorful foods. Focus on what you're adding, not what you're taking away. And then the reflections for this week. What are my top 5 greatest sorrows? Who am I without my old pain? What questions do I refuse to ask? And where am I not being honest? Okay, thank you for joining me on Chapter 7.